Back to the US now, where an appeals court has questioned whether President Donald Trump's travel ban discriminates against Muslims. The president's executive order temporarily banned entry for all refugees and visitors from 7 mainly Muslim countries until it was halted last week. One of the 3 judges on the appeals court in San Francisco has asked if it can be discriminatory if it affects only 15% of the world's Muslims. Our correspondent Harry Horton is in Washington. He joins us now with the latest. Good evening, Harry. What are the 2 sides, what have they argued in court today?
Well, this was an hour-long hearing. The judges gave a pretty tough series of questions to both lawyers representing the government and the lawyers representing the states of Minnesota and Washington who brought this case forward. Essentially, there's 2 arguments going on here. One argument is over the morals of this ban, whether or not it's constitutional and whether or not it discriminates against Muslims. And the other argument is whether or not a state, like Washington in this case, has the power to halt an executive order by the president as they have done. So the argument from the government lawyers is that, look, this is in the interests of national security and the President of the United States should have the power to be able to decide who he wants to let come into the country. The arguments for the state lawyers for Minnesota and Washington, they say that this executive order has unleashed chaos in their state. Their lawyer said that families have been separated, long-time residents were unable to travel overseas. So a pretty tough time for both lawyers. Difficult to know which way the judges are going to rule on this case. They've gone away to make the decision. We'll find out at some point soon.
Have the judges said anything at all today?
Well, they've said that they're going to make a decision as soon as possible. I mean, in all honesty, that could be at some point in the next few hours. It could be at some point in the next few days. I think what's quite clear is whichever side loses this case, we expect that they will appeal against the result. That could mean it goes down to a lower court, depending on the ruling, or goes up to a higher court. But many legal experts here in Washington expect that at some point this case will end up in the US Supreme Court. And that's important because you might recall recently Donald Trump nominated a new judge, Judge Neil Gorsuch, to fill the current vacancy on the Supreme Court. Democrats here in Washington say that they're going to make the confirmation hearing for that new Supreme Court judge as difficult as possible now, as they hope to try and drag this issue out and make it as embarrassing as possible for Donald Trump.
And what does that mean for the executive order? I mean, does that effectively put everything on hold, Harry?
Absolutely. So as things stand at the moment, this temporary stay, this vacuum that we're currently in, where the executive order is paused, is in place. So immigrants from those 7 Muslim majority countries who have visas to enter the United States, they can continue their journeys to the US if they want to. And many of them have been doing. The US refugee program is back up and running again. So any refugees who had been granted permission to come to the United States, they're now travelling back over here. But when this ruling comes through from the court, as I said, it could be in the next few hours, it could be in the next few days. If they decide that it isn't lawful for states such as Washington and Minnesota to block a presidential executive order, then Donald Trump's immigration ban will come back into force. And immediately at that point, those visas from those 7 Muslim majority countries will be revoked once more, and the refugee program will be halted again.
Has there been any reaction from Donald Trump yet?
Not yet from Donald Trump. He earlier today, before the court ruling, he indicated that he might be willing to pursue this all the way to the Supreme Court if possible. We've had no reaction from him since the court hearing earlier today. He's in a difficult position at the moment because his Attorney General, who would head the Department of Justice, still isn't in place. Jeff Sessions, his confirmation hearing is going on right now in the US Senate. So he's fighting one of the biggest legal battles we've seen in years in Washington without the head of his Justice Department. So he's in a pretty tricky position at the moment, and the Justice Department isn't as strong as it would probably like to be at taking on such a big case on behalf of the government.
Thanks for that, Harry. Our correspondent in Washington, Harry Horton. And this, of course, comes after the Vice President, Mike Pence, has had to step in to confirm a cabinet nomination. It's the first time this has happened in the history of American politics. The US Senate has confirmed Donald Trump's nominee for Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos. She's a wealthy Republican donor, but only after Mike Pence stepped in to cast a tie-breaking vote.